Hello, I'm back with another video. It's Aenslee Tanner here. And today I'd love to talk to you about the topic of unconscious bias, particularly as it pertains to making decisions in the workplace. And I want to address this topic because I'm still amazed that at this day and age, with all the research that's available, that I still hear people say things like, oh, I'm not biased. I only hire the best person for the job. And my brain immediately lights up and says, no, you don't. We're all biased. That's just how the human brain works. And I think it's fundamentally, it's a preliminary step that we have to acknowledge that fact if we want to make progress in terms of making our workplaces more equitable, in terms of capitalizing on diversity, making sure opportunities are available to everyone so that we can really have the best people in the right positions. So that's my main point today. To help make it, I want to just point you towards this resource. If you haven't already read it, Daniel Kahneman, Nobel Prize winner in economics, Thinking Fast and Slow is a book that I would highly recommend you read if you are at all in any position of leading people, hiring people, promoting people, recruiting people, or even just working with people. This book helps explain the cognitive biases that are at play all the time when we're making decisions. So that's a resource I would recommend as a starting point if you don't know anything else about unconscious bias. There's plenty of other stuff out there, even in terms of research for what kinds of interventions work. Because I think that's the important thing about acknowledging, first of all, that we're all biased, so that step two is we can mitigate the effects of our biases so that we can make more fair decisions when it comes to hiring and promoting people and just working with people in the workplace who we assign to projects, things like that. So just off the top of my head, things like removing gender or racial cues from CVs and resumes before when you're doing the initial screening process is something that you could do. There's research suggesting that blind performance testing, whether it's having coders develop some code for you or having musicians perform behind a screen, anything to take out any of to eliminate the possibility for your brain to be able to be biased about who you're looking at and viewing their performance through that lens is useful. Creating panels, hiring panels. So it's not just one, the hiring decision isn't just falling to one individual, but having a diverse range of folks involved in that decision, particularly folks from of other genders or races, folks from other divisions in the business to look in and have a say on the hiring processes so that you make sure you get a more balanced view. Things like that. Okay, so just a few ideas for you. There's plenty of more research out there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. But because acknowledging, before we can create these interventions, we just have to acknowledge the fact that we are biased. I wanted to share with you actually a story from another book, which is also a great resource called The Hidden Brain, and that's by Shankar Vedantam. It's The Hidden Brain, How Our Unconscious Minds Elect Presidents, Control Markets, Wage Wars, and Save Our Lives. Now, there is a short passage in here. I think it'll take me about 5 minutes to read, but I wanted to share it with you because I think it illustrates unconscious bias so beautifully and helps to illustrate why maybe we're so reluctant to acknowledge its existence. So, like I say, it's going to take about maybe 5 minutes to read, but I think it's so worth it. The metaphor is just absolutely beautiful. So I will acknowledge he has a number of case studies and cites a bunch of research throughout the book, particularly before this story comes up. So you will hear reference to some of that. So just to frame, those are some of the things he's talking about. So here we go. I want to tell you another story, a personal story. On its surface, it has nothing to do with the hidden brain, bias, or sexism, but stay with me a second. The story has an unexpected insight into the strange canvases that Ben Bars, Joan Rogarden, and Schultz volunteers have painted for us. Shortly after I started work on this chapter, I took a vacation with my family. For me, the highlight of our destination, the tiny island of Aenslee in Mexico, was a wonderful snorkeling opportunity off the southwestern coast. When I arrived at the snorkeling spot, it was noon. The water was calm and warm, the December sun glorious. The coral reef that lay a short distance away had been damaged in a recent storm, but it was growing back. At the southern lip of a small bay, officials had cordoned off the reef from swimmers with lines attached to buoys in order to allow the reef to grow. The cordoned off area was about 250 feet from my deck chair. The lines and buoys continued out of sight around a solid wall of rocks. I have a complicated love affair with the water. I didn't learn to swim until I was an adult. Well into my 20s, I carried the kind of unreasonable fear of water that you do not have if you learn to swim as a child. A considerable part of my enjoyment of the water lies in demonstrating to myself, over and over, that I have conquered my mortal fear. I'm a decent swimmer, but I also know that my fear has not completely disappeared. When things go wrong in the water, I easily panic. After several dips, I decided to take one final excursion, this time around the edge of the bay. I felt happy and wonderful and fit, and the water was calm. I suspected some of the best snorkeling lay around the edge of the rocks, 250 feet away. There were no signs posted that warned of any danger. With a good lunch in my stomach, I felt I could easily swim around the edge of the bay and back. I briefly thought about donning a life jacket and flippers, but decided against it. The life jacket would slow me down, and flippers don't allow for the kind of maneuverability I like when I'm snorkeling over a shallow reef. The moment I got into the water and headed for the edge of the bay, I knew I had made the right decision to swim without a life jacket or flippers. I felt strong and good. I had done a lot of swimming that day already and was surprised at how smoothly I was kicking through the water. The trip would be child's play, the way I was feeling. I knew I could easily swim well past the edge of the bay. I struck out purposefully to the lip of the rocks, and I imagined seeing myself from the deck chairs back on land, disappearing from view around the rocks. The water felt suddenly cooler as I rounded the lip of the bay. It felt pleasant. I kept within 10 or 15 feet of the line attached to the buoys. From my side of the line, the ocean side, I could see the coral reef growing back within the protective arc. The water was now 20 or 30 feet deep. The reef and the fish were lovelier and more plentiful than anything close to the main snorkeling area. All the other swimmers were staying in the main area. I was alone in the water and hidden from view. It felt delicious, as though I had the whole reef to myself. My legs and arms felt stronger than ever. Each kick took me several feet. My technique was better than I remembered. I lengthened my stroke, feeling the pull of the cool water against my torso. I felt graceful. Without realizing it, through steady practice, I had become a very good swimmer. I felt proud of myself. I knew from a previous visit that there was a recreational park area to the south with some excellent snorkeling, and I wanted to reach it before turning around. But after swimming 10 minutes or so past the lip of the rocks, all I could see when I lifted my head from the water was gray sea. Enough, I told myself. Time to turn around. I pivoted and started to kick my way back. A particularly lovely piece of coral lay just beneath me. But as I watched for it to go by as I swam past, the coral did not budge. I kicked again and again. It was as though I were swimming in place, stuck with invisible glue to a single spot. My fear of the water, long dormant, opened one monstrous eye. I instantly realized my grace and skill on the way out had not been grace and skill at all. I had been riding an undercurrent. I would now have to fight it on the way back. The reef did not look beautiful anymore. The water looked too deep. No one on land could see me. Why had I not worn a life jacket? How insane not to have donned flippers. I kicked and pulled and kicked and pulled. I was working much harder than before, but I was not traveling several feet with each stroke. Each effort brought me mere inches. My breathing in my own ears sounded labored, a huge pair of bellows shouting over the din of the sea. I debated whether to turn around and go with the current, in the hope of reaching the recreation area I had seen during my previous visit, and then hauling myself onto land. But I was no longer sure if there even was a recreation area anymore. Perhaps it had been closed because of dangerous undercurrents. If the recreation area did not exist, I knew I would quickly find myself in water well beyond my swimming capability. Currents from the east and west met in a ferocious battle near the southernmost edge of the island. Experts often say the best way to fight an undercurrent is to swim out and around it. In this case, that would have meant swimming out to sea, but the thought filled me with terror. I had to go back the way I'd come. I was gripped by an absolute sense of the lunacy of what I had done. There were no lifeguards in the snorkeling area, no boats, no one could see me. I lived the usual sedentary life of many urban professionals. My athletic exploits were mainly weekend heroics. What had made me think I was really fit enough to swim out so far when I had already exerted myself so much that day? I had not traveled more than halfway back to the edge of the bay when I decided I could go no farther. I was exhausted by the current. It was all I could do to hold the panic down, to keep pulling and kicking and breathing. I feared the onset of cramps. And over I asked myself how I could have missed the existence of the current until the moment I turned around and had to fight it. I don't know where the strength came from to make it back. Perhaps it was the image of my daughter, who had just turned 2, waiting for me on the shore. When I finally stepped back onto land, I was on the verge of collapse. I had had a narrow escape. Perhaps it is clear to you why I told you this story. Unconscious bias influences our lives in exactly the same manner as that undercurrent that took me out so far that day. When undercurrents aid us, as they did when Joan Rogarden first arrived at Stanford, we are invariably unconscious of them. We never credit the undercurrent for carrying us so swiftly. We credit ourselves, our talents, our skills. I was completely sure that it was my swimming ability that was carrying me out so swiftly that day. It did not matter that I knew in my heart that I was a very average swimmer. It did not matter that I knew that I should have worn a life jacket and flippers. On the way out, the idea of humility never occurred to me. It was only at the moment I turned back, when I had to go against the current, that I even realized the current existed. Our brains are expert at providing explanations for the outcomes we see. People who swim with the current never credit it for their success because it genuinely feels as though their achievements are produced through sheer merit. These explanations are always partially true. People who do well in life usually are gifted and talented. If we achieve success through corrupt means, we know we got there because we cheated. That's what explicit bias feels like. But when we achieve success because of unconscious privileges, it doesn't feel like cheating. And it isn't just the people who flow with the current who are unconscious about its existence. People who fight the current all their lives also regularly arrive at false explanations for outcomes. When they fall behind, they blame themselves, their lack of talent. Just as there are always plausible explanations for why some people succeed, there are always plausible explanations for why others do not. You can always attribute failure to some lack of perseverance, foresight, or skill. It's like a Zen riddle. If you never change directions, how can you tell there is a current? Most of us, men and women, will never consciously experience the undercurrent of sexism that runs through our world. Those who travel with the current will always feel they are good swimmers. Those who swim against the current may never realize they are better swimmers than they imagine. I absolutely love that story. I think it just so beautifully illustrates what the experience of bias is like and why it's so hard for us to see. But it's, I think, so important that we do acknowledge it if we want to create the shifts in our workplaces that allow us to make sure that we're making the most of our talent. So I hope you found that story useful. Again, I recommend both those books for Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman and The Hidden Brain by Shankar Vedantam as starting places if you're interested in learning more about bias and how you can overcome it. And I hope you found this useful. I'll see you again in another video soon.